The classroom was in complete silence when Megan, a girl of just 10 years old, raised her hand and asked the question everyone had wanted to ask for weeks. Her childish voice echoed off the peeling walls of the Santos Dumont Elementary School, cutting through the heavy air of that September afternoon. "Miss Helen, why do you cry every day?" The pen the teacher was holding fell to the floor with a dry sound. Her hands trembled. Her brown eyes, already red and swollen, filled with tears once more. And what she answered in the next few minutes would make all 32 students in that 5th grade class cry along with her. Helen Smith was 38 years old and had been teaching for 15. Her brown hair was always tied in a simple bun, a few grey strands already appearing at her temples. She wore thin-framed prescription glasses and simple but always clean and ironed clothes. She was known as one of the best teachers in the school, patient, dedicated, the one who stayed after hours helping struggling students. But in the last 3 weeks, something had changed drastically. Every day, without exception, Miss Helen arrived at school with red eyes. During lessons, her voice would falter in the middle of explanations. She needed to stop, turn to the whiteboard, pretend she was writing something, while discreetly wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The students noticed. Children always notice when something is wrong with the adults they love, and that class loved Miss Helen. The Santos Dumont Elementary School was on the outskirts of Cleveland, in the Hope Heights neighborhood. It was an old 2-story building, with walls that needed painting and windows that didn't close properly in the winter. But inside those modest classrooms, dedicated teachers worked miracles every day. Helen was one of them. She woke up at 5 in the morning in her small rented house, made coffee, took a shower, and took 2 buses to get to school by 7. She had lived alone since separating from her husband 5 years ago. They had no children. The relationship ended quietly, without major drama, just the silent acknowledgement that they were no longer happy together. Helen immersed herself in her work. Her students became her family. Every child who learned to read under her guidance was a personal victory. Every improved grade, every smile earned, every obstacle overcome, all of it filled the void in her heart. The 5th grade Class B was special. 32 students between 9 and 12 years old, most from poor families but full of life and dreams. There was John, a smart boy who wanted to be an engineer. Megan, curious and brave, who dreamed of being a doctor. Raphael, shy but kind, who drew better than many adults. Letitia, talkative and funny, always making everyone laugh. And so many others, each with their own story, their difficulties, their beauty. Helen knew each one's reality. She knew who went hungry at home and discreetly brought extra snacks. She knew who suffered domestic violence and kept an eye out for bruises. She knew who had parents in jail, mothers who were addicts, siblings involved with gangs. And she loved each of them with the ferocity of a mother. That's why, when everything started to crumble in her life 3 weeks ago, she tried to hide it. She tried to be strong, but the pain was too great. It all started on a Monday, the 15th of August. Helen was grading tests at home, alone, when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered, thinking it might be a student's parent, but the voice on the other end was from a man she didn't know. He introduced himself as Dr. Michael Foster, an oncologist at the Cleveland Clinic. Helen felt her heart freeze before he even continued speaking. The doctor said the test she had taken the previous week, after months of abdominal pains she had been ignoring, showed something concerning. They needed more tests, but there was a significant mass in her pancreas. The following words were a blur: cancer, advanced stage, aggressive treatment, reduced chances. Helen listened to everything as if submerged in water, the doctor's voice arriving distorted and distant. When she hung up, she sat in the small living room chair for hours, the stack of tests forgotten on the table, the clock on the wall marking the passage of time, her cat, Simon, rubbing against her legs asking for attention. But she couldn't move. She couldn't process it. She was only 38. She took care of her health. She didn't smoke, didn't drink. How was this possible? That night, Helen didn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling of her modest bedroom, mentally calculating. How much time did she have? 6 months, a year, 2 if she was very lucky. And the treatment? How much would it cost? Would her basic health insurance cover it? What if she had to stop working? How would she pay the rent? And her students? Who would finish teaching those children? On Tuesday, she went to work even though she hadn't slept. She put on extra makeup to hide the dark circles, forced a smile and entered the classroom. But in the middle of explaining fractions, her voice failed. She thought about how much time she still had to teach. How many fractions, how many texts, how many stories she could still share with those children. The tears came before she could control them. She quickly turned to the whiteboard and pretended she had gotten dust in her eye. The following days were a succession of doctor's appointments, tests, biopsies. The confirmation came on Friday. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, operable, but with metastasis to nearby lymph nodes. They would need to operate immediately, followed by aggressive chemotherapy. The chances, 30% 5-year survival. The doctor spoke with clinical professionalism, but Helen saw the compassion in his eyes. He knew he was delivering a death sentence disguised as statistical hope. Helen left the doctor's office and walked the streets of downtown Cleveland without direction. It was one of those cold days, typical of August. The biting wind, the sky gray and heavy with clouds. She pulled her thin coat against her body and walked. She passed by expensive store windows she could never afford, fancy restaurants she had never eaten in, hurried people living their normal lives without knowing that there, among them, walked a newly sentenced woman. She thought about calling someone. But who? Her parents were already deceased. She had a sister in Chicago she barely spoke to. Her ex-husband had his own new life. Close friends, some work colleagues, but nothing beyond superficial. Helen realized with painful clarity that she was completely alone in the world. The only family she really had were those children at school, and she was going to leave them. On Saturday, she tried to maintain normality. She cleaned the house, went to the grocery store, fed Simon, graded more tests, but every action seemed loaded with meaning. Would it be one of the last times? How many more Saturdays would she have? The anguish was physical, as if a weight were constantly crushing her chest. At night, she sat on the small living room couch and finally cried. She cried for hours, sobbing loudly, not caring if the neighbors heard. She cried for the life she hadn't lived, for the children she never had, for the dreams she hadn't realized. Sunday was worse. She woke up with eyes so swollen she could barely open them. She tried to read a book, but the words danced on the page. She tried to watch television, but couldn't concentrate. She just sat and stared at the walls, feeling time slip through her fingers. She thought about not returning to school on Monday, about asking for immediate medical leave, but then she remembered the faces of her students. She remembered John with his smart questions, Megan, always curious, Raphael with his drawings. No, she couldn't just disappear without an explanation. Monday arrived cold and rainy. Helen got ready on autopilot, but couldn't hide her red eyes. She arrived at school and went straight to her classroom. The students were already there, noisy as always, telling stories about the weekend. When she entered, everyone fell silent. They immediately noticed something was wrong. Miss Helen, always so firm and smiling, had a pale face and the eyes of someone who had cried too much. The lessons that day were difficult. Helen tried to teach, but her mind wandered. She looked at each face in that room and thought that perhaps she wouldn't see them graduate. She wouldn't see them grow up. She wouldn't know if John became an engineer, if Megan became a doctor, if Raphael continued with his drawings. Every thought was a stab, and the tears came without warning in the middle of sentences. The days dragged on like this. Helen went to work, tried to teach, but was a shadow of herself. She cried during lessons. She cried during recess, hidden in the teacher's bathroom. She cried on the bus home. She cried alone at night. The physical pain in her abdomen worsened, but it was nothing compared to the emotional pain of knowing time was running out. The other teachers noticed something was wrong. The principal, Mrs. Sonia, a woman in her 60s who had run the school for 20 years, called Helen into her office. She asked kindly if everything was all right, if she needed help. Helen thought about telling her. She opened her mouth to speak, but then the tears came again and she just shook her head, apologized and ran out. The children noticed too. Of course they did. On the third day, Letitia whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear that the teacher was sad. John agreed. Megan was worried. During recess, the whole class gathered under the mulberry tree in the yard and began to speculate. Did her boyfriend break up with her? Did someone in her family die? Is she sick? The children, with their innocent wisdom, came closer to the truth than the adults. It was on Wednesday of the third week that everything exploded. Helen was explaining the solar system, showing the drawing of the sun and planets in the worn-out textbook the school provided. She talked about how Earth was just a tiny dot in the universe, how each of us was even smaller, and as she spoke, she thought about how insignificant her entire life was. A tiny dot that would soon be erased and the universe would keep spinning without even noticing. Tears fell onto the book. Helen tried to disguise it, but her voice broke completely. She closed the book forcefully, apologized in a choked whisper, and ran out of the room. She left 32 confused, frightened students looking at each other, not knowing what to do. It was Raphael, the quiet and shy boy, who took the initiative. He stood up and said softly that they needed to find out what was happening to the teacher. They needed to help. Megan immediately agreed. She had always been the bravest in the class, the one who asked the questions no one else dared to ask. She said that when the teacher returned, she would ask directly. She would find out the truth. Some students thought it was invasive, that they shouldn't interfere, but the majority agreed. They loved Miss Helen. And when you love someone, you can't just stand by and watch that person suffer. Helen returned 10 minutes later. She had washed her face, but her eyes were even redder. She apologized again, said she wasn't feeling well, that they would continue the lesson. But when she picked up the book to start over, Megan's hand went up. High, firm, determined. Helen saw her and felt a shiver. There was something in the determination of that 10-year-old girl that scared and moved her at the same time. Megan didn't wait to be called. She simply spoke, her childish voice echoing in the silent room. "Miss Helen, why do you cry every day?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. All 32 students held their breath. Helen stood paralyzed, the book still open in her slightly trembling hands. She looked at those young faces, all fixed on her, waiting for an answer. And she knew she could no longer lie. Helen slowly placed the book on the desk. Her legs were weak, but she forced herself to stand. She took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Then, for the first time in 3 weeks, she was completely honest. She said she was crying because she was sick, very sick. She said the doctors had discovered she had a serious illness, that she would need to undergo difficult treatment, and that she was very afraid. The room fell into absolute silence. The kind of heavy silence that happens when children process information they don't yet have the emotional maturity to fully understand. Little Amanda, 9 years old, the youngest in the class, started crying first. Then it was Gabriel. Then Julia. Within seconds, tears were streaming down the faces of half the children in that room. Megan, who had asked the question, was in shock, her eyes wide, mouth slightly open, unable to form words. She had imagined many possible answers, but not this one. Not this. John, sitting in the front row, asked with a choked voice if the teacher was going to die. Helen felt her heart break upon hearing that question from an 11-year-old boy. She could have lied. She could have said no, that everything would be fine, that it wasn't so serious. But she looked at those honest faces and decided to honor them with the truth. She said she didn't know. That the doctors would do their best. That she would fight with all her strength, but yes, that possibility existed. That life was like that sometimes. Unfair and unpredictable. That sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason. Letitia, the talkative girl who always made everyone laugh, got up from her chair. She walked to the front of the class with determined steps, despite the tears streaming down her face. And without asking permission, she hugged Miss Helen. Hugged her tight, her small body trembling with sobs. Helen closed her eyes and returned the hug, smelling the scent of child soap and school lunch. It was as if that hug was a signal. One by one, all 32 students stood up. They formed a line, and each one hugged the teacher. Some cried, others were silent, processing. But everyone hugged. Raphael, the shy boy, whispered in Helen's ear that she was the best teacher in the world. Amanda said she would pray for her every night. John said that when he became an engineer, he would build a hospital just for her. When the last student returned to their desk, Helen was completely emotionally destroyed. She sat in her chair because her legs could no longer support her. She covered her face with her hands and cried. But for the first time in 3 weeks, it wasn't a lonely cry of despair. It was the cry of someone who was finally no longer alone, of someone who is loved, of someone who matters to someone. The following days were different. The 5th grade class B changed. The children became quieter, more mature in some way. They began to take care of Miss Helen in small but significant ways. Letitia stopped causing trouble during lessons so as not to stress the teacher. John helped carry the heavy books. Megan erased the whiteboard without being asked. Raphael drew cards with beautiful messages and left them on the teacher's desk. The news spread through the school. Other teachers found out. Principal Mrs. Sonia finally understood what was happening. She called Helen into her office again, but this time it was different. She didn't ask. She simply opened her arms and Helen fell into them, crying like a child. Mrs. Sonia, who had seen so many tragedies in her 20 years as principal, stroked Helen's hair and said she wasn't alone, that the whole school was a family, and family takes care of family. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Helen tried to keep working until the last day, but it was getting increasingly difficult. The pain in her abdomen was constant. The strong medication she took made her dizzy and nauseous, but she refused to be absent. Every day with her students seemed precious, a rare diamond she held against her chest. It was on a Thursday, 1 week before the surgery, that something extraordinary happened. Helen arrived at school and found the classroom completely decorated. There were colorful paper chains hanging, balloons tied to the desks, posters on the walls with messages written in the still childish handwriting of the students. "Be strong, teacher. You are our hero. We will never forget you. God will take care of you." In the center of the whiteboard, there was a large drawing made by Raphael. It was Miss Helen, depicted as a superhero, with a red cape flying among the clouds. Around her, 32 small drawings representing each student, all holding hearts. Helen stood in the doorway, looking at that scene, and once again the tears came. But they were different tears, tears of gratitude. Megan stood up and explained. She said they knew the teacher was scared, that they were scared too, but they wanted her to know she wasn't alone, that everyone there, every single one, was with her, that they would think of her every day, that they would pray, light candles, make prayer chains, everything children think can help, and that when she came back, because she would come back, they would throw a huge party. Helen couldn't speak. She just nodded, smiling through the tears. That day was one of the most beautiful of her entire career. The children were excited, optimistic with that pure and honest optimism that only children have. They baked a cake during snack time, using the school's kitchen. They sang Happy Birthday, even though it was no one's birthday. It was a celebration of life, of the teacher they loved, of the time they still had together. But there was a growing problem the children didn't know about, a problem Helen was hiding with all her strength. The treatment was very expensive. The surgery, even with insurance, had a high deductible and co-pays. On the simple private plan she had, the wait was 2 weeks, but the additional costs were astronomical. Specific medications the plan didn't cover, additional tests, appointments with specialists, possible complications. Helen did the math and arrived at a number that terrified her. She would need at least $40,000 beyond what the insurance covered. She didn't have it. Her parents were deceased and left no inheritance. She had no property, investments, or significant savings. Her teacher's salary, $3,200 a month, barely covered rent, bills, and food. She tried to get loans, but with her diagnosis, no bank would approve her. Her sister in Chicago said she couldn't help. She was having her own financial difficulties. Helen was trapped. She desperately needed the treatment, but had no way to pay for it. It was Mrs. Sonia, the principal, who took the initiative. She called a meeting with all the teachers and staff of the school. She explained Helen's situation. She proposed doing a bake sale, everyone contributing what they could. The teachers, who earned as little as Helen, opened their wallets without hesitation. $5 here, 10 there. Some managed to contribute 50 or 100. In 2 days, they collected $2,000. It was something, but far from what was needed. One of the teachers, Coach Mark from physical education, had an idea. Why not involve the students? Not to ask for money, of course, but to run a bigger campaign. They could organize a fall festival out of season, sell food, raffle tickets, raise funds. They could involve the whole community. Mrs. Sonia thought it was a wonderful idea. It was on Friday that they told the 5th grade Class B about the campaign. The children exploded with enthusiasm. They wanted to help in every way possible. Megan suggested making a campaign on social media, asking parents to help spread the word. John said he could make flyers on the computer. Raphael offered to make posters. Letitia said she could sing at the festival to entertain people. The news ran through the entire school. Suddenly, all the classes wanted to participate. Children from 6 to 14 years old, Teachers, staff, cafeteria workers, custodians, everyone got involved. The festival was scheduled for the following Saturday. They had 1 week to organize everything. 1 week before Helen's surgery. The small town where the school was located, on the outskirts of Cleveland, mobilized. The owner of the local grocery store donated the ingredients for the cake and hot dogs. The bakery donated the buns. Mothers sewed paper chains. Fathers set up booths. High school teenagers volunteered to help with the organization. It was as if the entire community had united for one cause, to save Miss Helen. Helen followed the preparations with a heavy heart. She didn't know if she should allow it, if it wasn't too much pride to accept so much help. But Mrs. Sonia was firm. She said it wasn't about pride. It was about love. It was about a community taking care of one of its own. And that Helen should allow people to show that love. The Saturday of the festival dawned with strong sun, a rare thing in Cleveland in August. It seemed even the weather was conspiring for everything to work out. From 8 in the morning, people started arriving at the school. They set up food booths, games, raffles. There was a clown, a fishing game, a post office, all organized by the students and their families. Helen arrived at noon, accompanied by Mrs. Sonia. When she saw the number of people, she was shocked. There were hundreds of people. Current students, former students she had taught years ago, parents, neighbors, local shopkeepers, people she didn't even know but who had heard the story and wanted to help. There was a huge banner hanging at the school entrance, all with Miss Helen. The children ran to hug her. She was wearing a headscarf because the medication was already making her hair fall out. She was thinner, paler, but she was there, and she was surrounded by love. John took her by the hand and led her to see each booth. He proudly showed her the flyer he had made on the computer, with the teacher's photo and an explanation about the campaign. Megan had convinced a local radio station to announce the event. Raphael had painted a large mural on the school wall with Helen's face surrounded by children. The festival lasted the whole day. They sold over 1,000 hot dogs, 500 slices of cake, 300 raffle tickets. There were dance performances by the students. Letitia sang, her childish but in-tune voice moving everyone. A local cover band offered to play for free. The community danced, ate, laughed, cried, all together. At the end of the day, when they counted the money raised, the result was surprising. $52,000, more than they needed. Much more. Mrs. Sonia, with tears in her eyes, handed the envelope to Helen. She said that was proof that she had never been alone, that she was loved by hundreds of people, that her life had touched so many others who were now returning that love. Helen broke down in tears. She fell to her knees right there in the schoolyard, surrounded by her 5th grade Class B students, who all hugged her at once. It was a moment no one there would ever forget. Teacher and students, crying together, laughing together, united by a love that transcended the normal classroom relationship. The surgery happened the following Monday. Helen entered the operating room afraid, but also with hope. She knew she wasn't alone. She knew that 32 students, an entire school, a complete community was rooting for her, and that made all the difference. The operation lasted 8 hours. It was complicated but successful. They managed to remove the tumor completely. The doctors were surprised by her strength and determination during recovery. They said it seemed like she had a very strong reason to live, and she did. She had 32 reasons to be exact. During the 2 months of recovery and chemotherapy, Helen received constant visits. Every week, Mrs. Sonia brought a different group of students to visit her. They brought drawings, letters, flowers they picked from their gardens, fruits their mothers sent. They sat around her bed and told stories about school, lessons, mischief. They made her laugh even when the pain was strong and the nausea unbearable. Megan, the girl who had asked the question that changed everything, visited every week without fail. She brought the class notebooks to show how they were studying. She said the substitute teacher was good, but she wasn't Miss Helen. No one was like Miss Helen. She asked when she would be back. Helen always answered soon, soon, even without being sure if it was true. They were difficult months. The chemotherapy was brutal. Helen lost all her hair, grew weaker. There were days she thought she couldn't take it, but whenever she thought about giving up, she remembered those faces. She remembered the hugs, the letters, the drawings stuck on her bedroom wall. She remembered Megan's question, and how answering honestly had changed everything, and she found the strength to continue. 6 months later, in February, the start of the new school year, Helen received the news that would change everything again. The tests showed she was in remission. The cancer had completely regressed. She would still need constant follow-up, regular tests, care. But the chances of a cure were now 80%. The doctors spoke of a miracle. Helen spoke of love. Love that heals, love that saves, love that makes you want to live. On the first day of school of the new year, Helen entered through the door of the Santos Dumont Elementary School again. She was wearing a brown wig, but planned to remove it soon, accepting her short hair growing back. She was thinner, more physically fragile, but infinitely stronger inside. When she entered the classroom of the now 6th grade Class B, the same class she had had a year ago, she was greeted with an explosion of joy. The children shouted, jumped, ran to hug her. Some cried with happiness. John said he knew she would come back, he was sure of it. Megan held the teacher's hand tightly and said she had prayed every day without missing one. Raphael handed over a new drawing, showing the teacher with a crown, written below, "Our Queen has returned." Letitia sang a song she had composed especially for that day. Helen looked at those faces, a year older but with the same love in their eyes. She thought about how much she had changed. A year ago, she thought she was alone in the world. She thought her life didn't matter much, that if she disappeared, no one would really miss her. How wrong she was. How profoundly, absolutely wrong she was. She realized, in those months of pain and struggle, that she had lived years hiding her vulnerability, pretending to be strong, never asking for help, never showing weakness. And it was exactly when she allowed herself to be weak, when she answered that question from Megan honestly, when she admitted she was scared and needed help, that she found the greatest strength of all, the strength of community, the strength of shared love. That day, Helen taught the most important lesson of her entire 15-year career. It wasn't about math or English, it was about courage. The courage to be vulnerable, the courage to admit we are not okay, the courage to ask for help, the courage to let people love us. She told the students that when Megan asked that question months ago, she could have lied. She could have said everything was fine. But she decided to trust them with the truth, and it was the best decision of her life. She said that life will knock us down many times, that we will face pains, losses, illnesses, sadness, but that we are never, ever alone if we allow people in, if we take off the mask and show who we really are, if we ask for help when we need it, if we accept love when it is offered. The children listened in silence, absorbing every word. Some didn't fully understand yet. They were too young. But they would keep those words, and they would make sense when they grew up, when they faced their own battles. And they would remember Miss Helen, the teacher who almost died, but was saved by the love of an entire community. The following years were of complete recovery. Helen returned to her normal work pace, more whole and happy than ever. She continued teaching, touching lives, being that dedicated teacher she had always been, but now she accepted help when she needed it. She opened her heart. She built deeper friendships with co-workers. She adopted a dog to keep Simon company. She started therapy to process everything she had been through. And that 5th grade Class B, now 6th, 7th, 8th, never forgot. They grew up knowing they had saved someone's life, that their love had literally made the difference between life and death. They grew up knowing they were important, that their actions mattered. That love isn't just a beautiful word, but a real force that transforms the world. Megan never forgot that it was her question that changed everything. She grew up and became a doctor, as she had always dreamed. Today she works in pediatric oncology, helping children with cancer. She says she chose that field because of Miss Helen. John became an engineer as he wanted and volunteers his time building houses for needy families. Raphael is an illustrator, his drawings touching hearts in children's books. Letitia is a teacher, inspired directly by the woman who raised her. And Helen? Helen still teaches at the Santos Dumont Elementary School. She is now 45 years old, her hair completely white, which she wears with pride, without dye. She tells her story to every new class she receives. She teaches not only school subjects, but about life, about love, about community. She is known throughout the town as the teacher who was saved by the love of her students. Every year on the anniversary of that festival that raised the money for her treatment, the school holds a celebration. It's no longer about raising money, but about celebrating life, celebrating love, celebrating the power of a united community. Former students return, some already adults with children of their own. They eat hot dogs, dance, laugh, cry remembering. And always someone tells the story of a teacher who cried every day, of a brave girl who asked the question everyone was afraid to ask, of a community that came together to save a life, of love that conquered fear and death. It is a story that passes from generation to generation, teaching that none of us is alone, that we all have value, that love is the most powerful force that exists. Helen still keeps in a special box at home every letter, every drawing, every message from those difficult days. When she has bad days, when the phantom pain of the illness haunts her, when life weighs heavy, she opens that box. She reads the words written in childish handwriting. She looks at the colorful drawings and she remembers. She remembers that she is loved. She remembers that she matters. She remembers that she has purpose, and that is all we need to carry on. It is all any of us needs. Comment "Never Give Up" down below to let me know you made it to the end of this video, and I'll mark your comment with a special heart. And if Miss Helen's story moved you, I have another one even more surprising to share with you. Just click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now and I'll tell you all about it. A big hug, and until the next moving story, bye-bye.